Imagine you're Cao Cao and you just received the gift of your lifetime, the severed head of the most feared general in China. He haunted you, he slaughtered your armies, and now you have his head. You slowly open this box. The eyes are still open, the beard is still moving. And what happens next solidifies Guan Yu's position in the Chinese heavens. Let me tell you this story. By the time Guan Yu reached Maicheng, he had almost nothing left. A few weeks earlier, he had commanded tens of thousands. He had held a province. He had made the most powerful man in China consider abandoning his own capital. Now he stood behind the walls of a tiny town with a few hundred soldiers, exhausted men who hadn't eaten properly in days. His army hadn't been defeated, it had been dissolved. Lu Meng's strategy was surgical. After taking Jingzhou, he didn't just occupy the territory, he cared for it. He fed the families of Guan Yu's soldiers. He treated the sick. He opened the granaries and let people take what they needed. And then he let the news travel. The message that reached Guan Yu's camp wasn't, "Your homes are burning." It was, "Your families are safe and fed, and the man feeding them is the one you're fighting." Soldiers deserted, not in panic, in quiet groups, slipping away at night, walking south toward their wives and children. Each one who left made the next departure easier. Guan Yu sent messengers to Liu Bei, 1,000 miles away in Chengdu. No response came. There was no time. The messengers would arrive weeks too late, if they arrived at all. He sent word to the nearest allied commanders. Nothing. Either they'd already surrendered, or they couldn't reach him. Guan Yu's son, Guanping, was still beside him, young, loyal, trained to fight by his father. He hadn't left. Now, in Chinese military culture, what was happening to Guan Yu was worse than defeat. It was the loss of mianzi, the loss of face in its deepest form. A general who loses his army hasn't just failed strategically, he has lost the mandate. The soldiers who once followed him have judged him, and they've judged him by leaving. Guan Yu, the man who never lost, who never wavered, who once rode through an entire army to take a general's head, was a fugitive again. The same thing he'd been before the Peach Garden, before the Oath, before all of it. Except this time, he was 60 years old. There was no garden, and the blossoms were long gone. Guan Yu decided to break out. Staying in Maicheng was death. Slow, starving, humiliating. If he could reach Liu Bei's territory in the west, there was a chance, a thin one, but the alternative was no chance at all. He gathered what men he had, a few hundred. They rode at night. The accounts vary on what happened next. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Sangguo Yanyi, gives it drama. Multiple ambushes, final stands, Guan Yu fighting until he's overwhelmed. The historical record is blunter. He was intercepted by Sun Quan's forces near a place called Linju. His small force was surrounded. Guanping fought. The sources disagree on whether he fell in battle or was captured alive and executed beside his father. Either way, the son did not survive. Guan Yu was taken alive. They brought him before Sun Quan's officers. There was a debate. Some advisors argued to keep him, use him as a bargaining chip, as leverage against Liu Bei. He was the most famous warrior in China. Surely he was worth more alive. Sun Quan said no. His reasoning was cold and clear. Cao Cao treated Guan Yu with extraordinary kindness. Gold, a mansion, a title, a horse. And Guan Yu still left him. He sealed the gifts and walked out the door. If Cao Cao, with all his power and generosity, couldn't hold this man, what makes you think I can? The logic was sound. A man who keeps one oath will never swear another. The execution was ordered. The sources don't describe it in detail. There is no final speech, no dramatic last stand. The greatest general of his era knelt. The blade came down. Guan Yu was 60 years old. It was late November or early December 219 AD. The oath he swore in the Peach Garden, "We vow to die on the same day," would not be fulfilled. Not exactly, but its shadow would stretch over everything that followed. Sun Quan had a problem. He'd killed the most famous man in China. Liu Bei would want revenge. That revenge would mean war. A war Sun Quan couldn't afford to fight alone. So he came up with a plan. Send Guan Yu's head to Cao Cao. The political logic was elegant in its cruelty. If Cao Cao received the head, it would look like he'd ordered the killing, or at least approved it. When Liu Bei retaliated, maybe he'd attack Cao Cao instead. At the very least, Sun Quan could share the blame. The head was placed in a box. The box was sent north to Luoyang. Cao Cao saw through the scheme instantly. He'd been outmaneuvering rivals since before Sun Quan was born. He knew exactly what this was, a trap dressed as a gift. But when he opened the box, the story says something happened. According to the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, 三国演义, when Cao Cao lifted the lid, Guan Yu's eyes opened. The long beard shifted, bristled, as if still alive. Cao Cao staggered backward, his attendants panicked. Now, was this supernatural? Was it a nerve reflex? Was it fiction added centuries later to make the moment more dramatic? The text doesn't care. What the text cares about is what Cao Cao did next. He looked at the face of the man who had refused his kingdom, the man who sealed every gift, hung the title on the gate, and rode away on the very horse Cao Cao had given him, red hair, to find a man who had nothing. And Cao Cao spoke to the head as if Guan Yu were standing in front of him. General, it has been a long time. Then he ordered a body carved from Chenxiangmu, eagle wood, a rare sacred wood that released fragrance for decades, a wood used for temples, for offerings, for the most important carvings in Chinese culture. He had artisans sculpt a full body. He dressed it. He placed the head. He arranged Guan Yu's robes, his beard, as if preparing a king for burial. He gave Guan Yu a full state funeral with the honors of a feudal lord. Musicians, incense, mourning banners. He then titled him Jing Wang, King of Jing Province. Now, think about what's happening here. Cao Cao is the villain of the Three Kingdoms. In every version of this story, he is the tyrant, the schemer, the man who would rather betray the world than be betrayed. But in this moment, standing over the body of the man who rejected him, he shows something that the story doesn't want to admit. Cao Cao loved Guan Yu, not politically, not strategically, as one man recognizing another. The man Guan Yu rejected honored him more in death than the allies who failed to save him. Guan Yu was dead, buried by his enemy with more honor than his friends could offer. Within a year, Cao Cao himself would be dead. Within 2 years, Zhang Fei, the last of the three brothers, would be murdered by his own officers. Liu Bei would launch a war of revenge against Sun Quan that would destroy his kingdom and his health. The oath from the Peach Garden had held for 35 years, and when it broke everything around it. But the story didn't end at that funeral, because in the mountains of Dangyang, near the place where Guan Yu fell, travelers began hearing a voice on the wind, a cry in the dark, the same words over and over. Return my head, return my head. If you know someone who asks the kind of questions that change everything, share this video with them. They will love this story. Return my head, return my head. An old monk heard the screaming. He didn't run, he didn't chant. He asked Guan Yu one question, and that question turned a dead general into the most worshipped figure in Chinese civilization. This is the final episode in this series, and it is on your screen. Click it to watch now. This is the one you don't want to miss. And now that you made it this far and you're still watching this video, here is the secret password, Jade. Start your comment with this word and I'll reply to you. And until next time, 再见!